Today we are going to work a fun colorwork granny stitch pullover, and I've chosen these fall-ish colors for this one, but you can choose whatever color you want. I love the Color Theory yarn line because all the colors tend to go together so well. My main color will be this Moonbeam, and then I'll be rotating between the colors Dijon, Caper, Nutmeg, and Raisin. And like I said, you can really mix and match so many colors from this yarn line. If you want to use a substitute yarn, I highly suggest checking out my blog post on gauge and why it's important to just match the gauge when it comes to yarn substitutions, especially with a garment pattern. The other things you will need today is a size 5mm crochet hook. This is the dots hook from We Crochet, a yarn needle to weave in those ends, stitch markers. I always love to have stitch markers around for any project, scissors, and a tape measure is always a fantastic idea when you're making a garment to see your body measurements, or if you want to change something or how long or wide something is. Tape measure helps keep you on track, as well as needing one to check your gauge swatch. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this pattern, talking about all the things we'll need to do, all the steps we need to take to create this beautiful pullover. Now the construction for this garment is worked the body part from bottom up, and same with the sleeves. The sleeves will be worked separately from the cuff up to the arm depth. We're going to start by working some ribbing, then we'll jump into that granny colorwork section, and then we'll be working our v-neck as well as our armholes in panels, joining those at the shoulders, and then we'll work and attach the sleeves. This is a really fun one to do. Never be afraid of having different pieces and seaming. It's not as difficult as you think. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump right in. We're going to make the ribbing, and the ribbing is done in rows. So we're going to go ahead and place a slip knot onto our hook, and we're going to start by chaining 10. Now that last chain is a turning chain, so I'm going to tighten that down a little, and then working in those back humps, we are going to single crochet across, which means that's a total of 9 single crochet stitches. And we will have 9 stitches for every single row of the ribbing. We're going to start row 2 by chaining 1, and then working in those back loops only, we are going to single crochet into each stitch across. Now if you want to work the first and the last stitches of the row through both loops, you can. It can make those edges look a little bit sharper, but it's not necessary. If it's easier to just work every single stitch in the back loop only, please feel free to do so. So once we have single crocheted 9 stitches, we're going to turn our work, and we are going to be repeating row 2. We're going to chain 1 and then work every stitch across in the back loop only. Now this will create our ribbing, and depending on what size you're making, that will dictate how many rows we do. Today on camera, I am creating the size small. Now since I'm doing the size small, I have gone ahead and done 156 rows of ribbing for this pattern. Now once you have all the rows done for your ribbing, you'll have a really long strip of fabric, and we are going to join this together. We're going to take the first row we did and the last row we did, making sure that none of this ribbing is twisted, that it's all like worked without a twist, and we are going to join them together. And we're going to do this by placing our sides together, chaining 1, and we're going to go through the back loop only of our first stitch and the back loop only of the stitch from our very first row, and then yarn over and slip stitch those together. And we're going to do that for all 9 stitches. So just going through the back loop of the row closest to you, the back loop of the row farthest away, and slip stitch that together. Now it's up to you if you like this side the way that it looks. We have an option here. You can flip this inside out if you like the other side. It really doesn't matter. It's a pretty invisible seam. It's not that noticeable. And then we're going to start working in the round. Now our next step is a setup row in order for us to continue to work in the round. So this is our bottom ribbing. The next steps are to work in the round. We're going to be working along one edge of this ribbing. So you can go ahead and chain 1, and then we are going to be slip stitching 1 slip stitch per row all the way around. So that means I'll have 156 slip stitches all the way around. And if you need a stitch marker to mark that very first stitch, please do so that you can keep track. And we're just going to lightly, we're not going to do this too tight. We're not going to do these slip stitches too tight. Otherwise it could change the flexibility of our ribbing when we're putting this on and off of our bodies. So slip stitch 1 slip stitch per row all the way around, and that's 156 slip stitches. Now after working 1 slip stitch per row all the way around, for the size small, we still have 156 stitches. So I'm going to move my stitch marker and I am going to join to the very first stitch in the round, and then I'm going to turn my work. We're turning our work here, still working with our main color, which is the color A in the written instructions. And we're going to turn. Now we're going to work into the first stitch of this round, but we're going to work into that front loop only, or if you want, you can work through both loops if you don't want to work through the front loop only. Sometimes I like working through the front loop because it leaves that nice line along the front, but where we're skipping stitches, it's not as critical if you do or you do not do this. I will say what I like to do is grab some of the fabric along the inside, along the back side of this, and then the front loop, and then start working my stitches that way. So I'm kind of working through this extra fabric and the front loop as I go. Now we're going to start with a stacked single crochet. It looks like a single crochet. This is what it starts with, but we're going to go back into that left side, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. And this is the first stitch of the row. That's a stacked single crochet. And we're going to go ahead and mark that as the first stitch in our round here. And now we're going to double crochet 2 more stitches into that very first space. And then we're going to repeat the next part all the way around. So I'm going to skip the next 2 stitches. So we're going to skip 2, and in the next we're going to work 3 double crochets, and I am doing mine through that front loop only. And it is kind of hard to tell when you're working on the wrong side of your work to see the right side. So sometimes I kind of have to flip it a little bit back and forth, just rotate it slightly towards me so I can see what I'm doing here. So I'll skip the next 2 stitches, and in the next we're going to 3 double crochet. And that's our repeat all the way around. This is just working those granny groups by working a granny group in a stitch and then skipping 2 stitches. And once we work that all the way around, we'll come on back and we'll be starting our color work. Now at the end of round 1, we're going to set ourselves up for round 2. So here comes the fun part. I love doing this color work, but round 2 is going to start with our color B. So whenever you're doing color work and there's a color change, that color change is actually going to happen on the last stitch and the last yarn over that you're working. So since this is the wrong side of work, I'm always going to keep any yarn that I'm carrying on the wrong side of the work. And then I'm going to yarn over that very last yarn over the last stitch and pull through. And what that does is it sets us up to work the next round with that color. So I'm going to move my stitch marker and I am going to join with the color B. And this way we are ready to work round 2. Now for round 2, we need to turn our work. And this is where we want to double check and make sure that the yarn that we are going to be carrying is on the back side. So your tail ends, the yarn that we're going to be working with, we're going to keep it all on the back side because this is the right side of our work. And we want to keep all of our tail ends or the yarn that we're going to be carrying for this color work on the back side. So we're going to start by working into the very first space and doing a stacked single crochet. And then we're going to double crochet 2 more into that space, but we're going to be changing colors. So on that last yarn over, we're going to just simply pick up our color A and pull that through. And now we're going to do our next space with the color A. We're going to double crochet 3 into that space. And then we'll be switching back to our color B. So we're going to pick that up from the back. You pull that through the last part of that double crochet stitch, and then we'll work 3 double crochets into that next space. And then we'll be rotating back and forth all the way around until that last space. But notice we're carrying these loops across the back of our work, which is what we need to do. When we work our next round, I'll show you how we can kind of tighten up those loops a little bit so they aren't as easy to catch on fingers or anything like that. But in color work, this is what we do. We carefully float the yarn or carry the yarn on the back of the work. And you want to make sure when you are changing colors that you're not pulling that too tight. And we don't want it like extremely loose, but we don't want to pull so tight that it could pucker our fabric on the front and cause issues that we wouldn't want. We want the fabric to have a nice drape and maintain a nice gauge. So when we go to change colors, you don't want to pull tightly. You want this to be a little bit loose, and that's perfect. And then we'll just keep working that all the way around. Now that we're back around to that last space, we're going to be working that last space with the color A, and then switching back to the color B, because this next round is all about the color B. So we're going to join. We're not going to be working two colors for this next round. We're just going to be working the color B. Now we will be using color A again when we get to a later round. So if you want to carry it up the inside of your work, you absolutely can. So I'm going to leave the color A attached, but we're going to let it sit on the wrong side of the work. And now we're just simply going to be working the color B for round 3. We're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet and then 2 more double crochets in that same space. And now we're simply going to be working the color B all the way around without changing colors. But what I want to show you here is that whenever you go into the next space, so we have these strands that we have been carrying, when you go into the next space, always work underneath all of the strands, and that will help, as you can see, tighten that, lessen that float, which is fine if it's a little bit loose because this tightens it down just a little bit. And so it's not as long once we do this round that kind of gathers up and helps working over those, helps them be smaller floats than they were before. But they don't show on the front, so it works out really nice. So I'm going to work this round all the way around and then come on back. Now here we are at the end of round 3. We're about to start round 4. So we want to, on this very last yarn over, switch back to the color A. So make sure that your color B strand stays on the inside, so the wrong side of the work. And then we're going to grab the color A and we're just going to bring that up and over. And then we're going to kind of tighten things down, make sure everything looks good. And we're going to be using that the color A to join at the end of this round. And now we're ready to turn our work. And we are set up to start working this round. Now this round will be rotating every other space between colors again, but we're starting with this color A with a stacked single crochet and 2 double crochets into the same. And I can feel that loosened up a little bit in there from that color change. So I'm just going to tighten down on the back. And now I'm ready to change colors. And then we're just repeating somewhat what we did before. We just started off on a different color here, but we're going to be working every other space with the different color. We're going to go back and forth until we get to the end of this round. Now at the end of round 4, we're going to keep the color B, but we can go ahead and fasten off the color A. So we're going to join at the end of this round and then turn our work. And round 5 is just repeating round 3, which is simply just working the color B all the way around. But we're not going to be using the color A for a little while, so instead of carrying it up quite a few rounds, I think it's best just to simply go ahead and fasten that off. And now we're going to just be working one round with the color B, just like we did on round 3. And then I'll come back and do round 6. Now at the end of round 5, we're going to be starting with the same color B for the first group of this next round. So we can go ahead and leave that as we join as the color we're going to start with. And now for round 6, we're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet into the very first space. and then double crochet 2. But this is where we are going to be bringing in our color C, and it's so much fun to wash this work up depending on what your color choices are. If they're the same as this, that's fine. If you've made your own, I definitely want to see it. I've already thought of a billion other color palettes for this, but it is so much fun to switch colors and see this really come alive. So now we're going to work with the color C for the next group, and then go back to the color B. And this is essentially all the instructions needed in terms of finishing out the color work. You're just going to keep using all these same methods, switching through your colors until you have completed through round 19. And after that, we're just going to be doing some repeats for the length of this, and we'll come back and talk about that. But I'm going to keep on going and working the rest of the color work rounds off camera using all those methods, and I'll come on back when I've got that section done. So now I've completed the color work rounds, and I'm simply going to be doing the rest of the rounds with the color A until I've reached the point from the underarm to the length that I want. The nice thing is the ribbing is on here already. So when you are adjusting this, if you want to adjust this for length, this will be the total length from your underarm down. I have suggested a length size in the pattern, but once again, you could make this as long as a dress. You could do a longer sweater to wear with like leggings, or you can even do a short one or a crop top style. The choice is up to you. But from here on out, for the body, we are just going to be working with color A, so you can fasten off and weave the ends for all these other colors. So here we are with this gorgeous color work for the bottom part of our pullover. And after round 19, I did 5 more rounds. And this is a shorter sweater. So if you want to customize this, now is the time. Just remember, in the pattern, I've included yardages for this length of sweater. So it will use a little bit more yardage if you want to make it a little bit longer. But if you want a longer one, if you want it as long as a dress, now is the time. You're simply going to continue to repeat that round 19 for as many times as you want until you reach the underarm of your body. So this section here is from the underarm down, and then that will hit you where it sits on your body. Now, everyone is different, so I do recommend holding this up to yourself because no one has the same length of torso or anything like that. So it's a great time to do a fit check, a great time to see if you want to add or remove some rounds before we move forward. Now, for this next section, we are going to be working on just some of the stitches of this next part. So we're working in rows now and not rounds. We're going to be building the top of this. So this, what I've worked right here, is the front, and I'm leaving all of the back unworked. We're only going to work the front section all the way across the front because I want to add a little bit more length before we start that V, so that it's not too low on our chest. If you want a lower V, you can omit these rounds and you'd have a lower V on the front, and you just need to add some rows to your shoulders to make up for that arm depth. But I'm gonna add a couple rows so that I like the fit where I can wear it without having to necessarily wear something underneath it, and it's not too low cut. But whatever you want to wear it, however you want to wear it, it's totally fine. So for this row, so this is row 1, this is the wrong side of the work. I've started by doing a stacked single crochet. So I had joined and then turned, and I started with a stacked single crochet and 2 double crochets into that first space. And then I worked 3 double crochets into the next 24 spaces for the size small. And then I double crocheted 1 into the next space, and that's where we're stopping. So this is row 1, and we're not going to work any more stitches, and we're simply going to turn our work. So now for the size small, we are going to be working across just these 76 stitches. We're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet into the first and 2 double crochets into that very first space. And then we are going to work 3 double crochets into all of the spaces across until we get to the last 3 stitches of this row. So now that we are at the last 3 stitches, we are going to double crochet into that last stitch and turn our work. And we are done with this section, but if you want to add more, you can. You're just going to have to remember to take some rows off at the very top of the shoulders so that the arm depth isn't too large. Now we're going to be working on our very first front panel, and we're not going to be working all the way across this row. So this is where we're going to be splitting it again, and this is just going to be one side of the front. So we're going to start for the size small by doing a stacked single crochet, and then 2 double crochet stitches into that first space. And then we are going to work 3 double crochets into the next 11 spaces. So now that I've worked in the next 11 spaces, we're going to double crochet 1 into the next space, and then we are going to turn our work. So we're stopping here at 37 stitches. It's a total of 12 granny groups plus that 1 double crochet, and we're going to turn our work, and we're only going to be working on this first front panel. And now for row 2 of this first front panel, we are going to start by doing a stacked single crochet into the first stitch, but then we are not going to be working into this space. We're going to skip it. That's going to help decrease it along the V for that V neckline. So we're going to skip working in the first space, and we're just going to go right to the next one, working 3 double crochets. And then we're going to work in 3 double crochets into each space until the very end. The last 3 stitches, we'll skip 2 and double crochet in the last, just like we did on previous rows. So we're just working the rest of it in that stitch pattern. And now we're going to turn and do row 3, and this row is going to start and work in the stitch pattern repeat. We're starting with a stacked single crochet, 2 double crochets into that very first space. And then we are going to do 3 double crochets into each space across until we get to the last 4 stitches of this row. And now that we are at the last 4 stitches of the row, we are going to double crochet into the last. That's the top of our stacked single crochet from the previous row. And that will continue to help that decrease that neckline. Now for rows 4 through 12, we are going to be repeating rows 2 and 3, ending on a row 2. That will decrease our stitch count to 19, and then I'll come. So our next steps are to repeat rows 2 through 3, and we're going to do that until we decrease to 19 stitches. So at this point, I have a total of 13 rows in this decrease section. And now the next thing that we will need to do is to work 3 rows without increasing. To do this, we're going to turn our work, and then we're just going to work in our regular stitch pattern. That means that we're going to start with a stacked single crochet, and we'll do 2 double crochets into that first space this time because we're not doing any more decreasing. We are simply working 3 rows with not decreasing stitches, just as in the stitch pattern. And it will be different depending on what size you are making. But at the end of this, I'll have 16 total rows for the decreasing section for this size. But that doesn't count the 2 rows we did at the very start of this. So we have a total of 18 rows when we get done with this section for the arm depth, but is 16 rows for the decreasing section. So once I have these 3 rows done, I'm simply going to fasten off, and we're going to go to the next decreasing section for the second panel. So now that I have finished this section by doing those 3 rows of non-decreasing, I'm going to fasten off and leave a tail for seaming when we get to the point where we will seam our shoulders together. So I'm leaving a bit of a long tail for that. Now it is time for us to work that second front panel, and I have the wrong side of the work facing me because that's how we started this panel, with the wrong side facing, so we will do the same here. Now you can join with a slip knot or place a slip knot onto your hook and go right into that stacked single crochet, and we are going to be doing that in the same space as the last stitch worked from the front panel. And then we are not going to work any more stitches into this space. We're going to go right into that next space, working 3 double crochets. So we've already got that V started there. And now we're going to work 3 double crochets until we get to the end of this row. And we are going to end this row in pattern by just skipping 2 and double crocheting into the last. And now we are going to turn our work and we're going to start decreasing with row 2 for this second panel. But we are going to be starting this row the same as a stitch pattern where we do the stacked single crochet and then 2 double crochets into that first space, because this side is the side where our arm will be. And now we're going to work 3 double crochet stitches into each space until we get to the last 4 stitches of this row. Now I want to mention that this row 1 had 38 stitches, so a slightly different stitch count than what we started with on the last one, but it works out well in the end. Now at the end of row 2, we are going to skip 3 stitches and double crochet into the top of that stacked single crochet for that very last stitch. And now we're going to turn our work, and row 3 is also a decreasing row. And now for row 3, we will start with a stacked single crochet, and then we are going to skip working anything in that first space and go right into that next space with 3 double crochets. And then we'll work all the way to the end in pattern. Now, just like we did for the first panel, we are going to continue to repeat rows 2 and 3 until we decrease to 19 stitches. Now for the second panel, rows 4 through 14 repeated rows 2 through 3, ending on a row 2. And then we only needed to do 2 additional rows to match the same height as that first panel. And now we can go ahead and fasten off our yarn, leaving a long tail to join the seams later. Now the last section that we need to complete is this back panel. So we're going to go ahead and do that next. It's super simple, but we want to make sure that we're starting it with the same side that was facing here. So the wrong side will be facing when we attach our yarn. So I'm going to go to the last stitch worked and we're going to go to the next space. So this space is used. We're going to go to the next space for this underneath the arms. And you can either slip stitch to join or create a slip knot onto your hook and start with that stacked single crochet. And then we will do 2 double crochet stitches into that same space. And then we are going to work 3 double crochet stitches into all the open remaining stitches all the way across until we get to this other side. Now that we have worked to that last space, we are simply going to double crochet 1 and then turn our work. And we're just going to be working those stitches for the back section in that stitch pattern repeat. So for the size small, we have a total of 76 stitches across on this back panel, and we will work it for a total of 18 rows. Next, we will want to seam the areas at the shoulder. I pinned them together with stitch markers just to kind of keep them in place, but we're simply going to take our yarn needle and then we are going to be seaming back and forth between the stitches. You can do a whip stitch, you can do a slip stitching with your crochet hook if you like to have a line on there. I just simply like to go back and forth between my stitches and seam those together. So we're going to be doing that all the way across for each section of the shoulders. And that way we can move on to our next steps because the body of this is done. Now I just want to note, feel free to try it on and see what you think. And you could keep this as a vest if you wanted to. Now the next thing that we want to work on is the neck ribbing. And I'm going to be attaching the yarn when we start at the point of the V on the front. Because these are going to cross over, that's a great place to start and stop because we'll use those seams to tack those into place. So I'm going to go ahead and place a slip knot onto my hook. And then I am going to start by slip stitching all the way around. Now the reason why I like doing this is because I feel like it makes the ribbing that we're going to do a bit cleaner when we are working it around, and it helps it be a lot easier and a lot smoother. So as we work this around, you will do about 2 slip stitches per every double crochet row, and then of course 1 slip stitch here. But when we get to these corners, I'm going to talk about how to make this just a little bit less of a pointed join here. We're going to round it out slightly. Now, when we get to the point where we're at our seam, where the back behind the neck joins with that front, we want to do a little bit less slip stitching. So I'm not going to do one here. I'm going to skip that as I would have normally done 2 per row, but I'm going to skip that, go to the center point here. And then when I start working over here, I'm going to skip 1 too. And that will help round that out to be not quite as sharp. And then I'll keep slip stitching all the way around. So now that I have worked all the way back around to the beginning, we are going to slip stitch into that first stitch. And here's where we are going to start working in rows. So we're going to work ribbing in rows all the way around. So we're going to start by chaining 5. We're going to be working 4 stitches. So we're going to start by doing a single crochet in the second chain from the hook. So that very last chain was a turning chain, and then single crochet in the remaining 3. And that's a total of 4 single crochet stitches. Now, if you want to adjust the neckline here, this ribbing is going to add more fabric along the neckline, so you can do less stitches if you want. If you prefer just to single crochet around or leave it as is with the slip stitches, that's fine too. It's whatever your personal preference is, but if you want to change the height of the ribbing, you can do so by chaining more or less. So now we are going to slip stitch in the back loop only of the next 2 stitches. And then we are going to turn our work, and we will skip those 2 slip stitches, and in the back loop only we are going to single crochet the 4. So skip 2 slip stitches, back loop only, single crochet 4. And in that very last stitch, the outer edge stitch, if you want to single crochet through both loops, that can help make the edge a little bit straighter if you prefer to. So I've chained 1, I'm going to turn my work, and we are going to be repeating these steps. So we'll single crochet 4 in the back loop only, unless you want to do that edge stitch through both loops. And then slip stitch through the back loop only into the next 2 stitches. Sometimes I like to also go through some of that fabric on the back side as well, just to make it a bit more sturdy. And then we'll turn our work, skip the 2 slip stitches, and single crochet in the back loop only for 4. And we're going to be repeating that all the way around into every single slip stitch until we get back to here, like all the way around. Now, after working the ribbing all the way around, so we are back to the beginning, and it doesn't matter which side you end here. You just want to end at a point that looks nice. And then we're going to go ahead and fasten off, leaving a long tail so that we can finish this off nicely. Now, what we will do next is we're simply going to take this side and fold it over and match it up like it's going to this point here, and just stitch it in place. And that's how we're going to finish off this neck. Now, once this is stitched into place, you can fasten off, weave in your ends, and next we're going to join the sleeves. Now, our next step is to make a sleeve, and I'm not going to walk through each one of these steps because it is the same instructions as we did on the bottom part of the sweater. We're only doing different stitch counts. So for our ribbing, instead of starting with a longer chain, we're just chaining 5 and then working in the second stitch from the hook and the 4 stitches across for the ribbing. So the ribbing stitch count is just 4 stitches. And then we are going to be working rows 1 through 19, the same as the body color work. Now, for the size extra small to 1X, you'll make this as a 2. But for the larger sizes, we don't want to start too wide at our cuff because our cuffs shouldn't really vary too much. So you still are starting with a smaller stitch count, and then we'll be doing some increasing to get to the length and the width we want after doing that color work. And I've included instructions in the PDF pattern on how to increase when it comes to the granny stitch so that we get to the correct stitch count when we get to the top. Now this is the perfect time to make an adjustment in terms of the length of your sleeve. Since we have the body part of this completed, we can put it on, hold the sleeve up, pin it in place as if we were going to seam it using some stitch markers, and make sure that the length of the sleeve is what you want. You can always add rounds if you need to, or take out rounds to get that nice fitted look. No one has the exact length of arms. That's just not a thing. We all are built a little bit differently. So you may want more or less length in the arms depending on your personal customization. So we'll make 2 sleeves and then come on back and we'll go to next steps. Now, the last thing we need to do is simply stitch on these sleeves. So I've already done 1 sleeve, and I'll zoom in and show you how to do those stitches, but you can use any seaming method that you prefer, that you like to do. But what I will say is go ahead and use some stitch markers or some sewing pins and pin that sleeve into place so that when you are working it around and seaming it, you make sure that it is stitched on evenly, that we don't have any extra areas of fabric, that it all lines up as best as we can. So I highly suggest clipping this into place before you start seaming, and then grab your yarn needle and let's get seaming on these sleeves. So as you can see here, zoomed in a little bit, we're just going back and forth between those stitches, or if you prefer, doing a whip stitch, attaching this sleeve to the part of the body. And I really hope you have enjoyed creating this awesome granny stitch sweater with that granny stitch color work. I have already thought in my head all the different color combinations we could do here. We could even do one a little bit more for spring with some brighter colors, maybe some pinks, some purples and blues. The possibilities are endless. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back for more fun projects soon.